Well, I'll admit, from a personal level, when we had the 6-week break, I did breathe a slight sigh of relief, because it did give us the opportunity to look at other stories that possibly we had missed or hadn't done as in-depth as we would have liked to. What were you working on in the interim, Teresa?
I was working, initially on the elections, and then the elections aftermath. I think, working on the strike. And I think as well, just in terms of the trial itself, it's almost like they always say to you, study for an exam the night before so you can sleep on it. And the next morning, the sort of important information will come to the top of your mind. And I think that 6 weeks was almost like a sleeping period for the public. And I think the public is at a stage where we want to know the big answers. We want to know, is it guilty? Is it not guilty? Is it culpable homicide? And I think perhaps that's why people are struggling a little bit, is that they've had that sleep and they don't want to fiddle with the minutiae. They want to know, what are the key themes of the trial? What are the most important things that are going to come out of this?
Reggie's agreeing with you. I see you nodding.
Yeah, no, most definitely. I mean, Teresa, since the trial started, she's been trying to, keep the lighter side of the trial. I mean, as to what's happening in court. I mean, she's there on a daily basis. And I mean, generally, people out there, they would like to see, the big question on everyone's lips is what's going to happen to him. Is he guilty? Is he not guilty? We don't know that. We can't pronounce on that. We have to wait for the whole trial, obviously, to finish. But, I mean, it will always be on people's lips.
Has Oscar sold more newspapers for you?
We've been selling more newspapers, but I think, since the story broke last year, it's been a huge story of interest. I don't think only for the Daily Sun, for all the newspapers. We've been covering it. I don't think we cover it with in mind that we want to sell newspapers first, but we cover it because there's such a huge interest, and not only locally but internationally.
What's been interesting as well is when I was thinking about the story in the LAL is that there have been 2 major cases where children were abused or families were abused by one family member. In one case, it was a husband terrorizing the whole family and the children. Yesterday, we saw this sentencing of a woman who apparently orchestrated rape for a whole entire family and their husband. See, what that story reminds of, the Oscar stories, is either intentional violence or accidental violence. But there are stories of real violence, of shocking and horrific kind, that are in the courts with us every day.
Do you think journalists, Professor, are now hyper-vigilant about doing stories like that when it comes to violence, and particularly against women?
I think so. I think the Oscar trial to some extent might have done that, but we've always had violence, rape and child abuse in our stories. I think this indirectly might have done so, and that might be a help. Remember where we started off is that in the court next door, there was a similar story of violence which did not get the same level of attention, would otherwise not have gotten the same level of violence. So we have to reflect back and say, in future, how do we deal with questions of violence? And does it have to involve a model and an athlete like Oscar, where it might turn out to have been accidental violence, but we live with daily real violence?
Violence is something that unfortunately we deal with on a daily basis as journalists and in our newsrooms, and we need to cover those stories all the time. How do you cover them in your paper, Reggie, without over-sensationalizing?
Sure. We cover them as fair as possible, but to tell you the truth, readers also complain. They complain that it's now getting way too much. There's way too much murder, rape and violence in our newspapers, and can't you guys go to the lighter side? I'm sure there are more positive, brighter stories out there. There are more.
What's your response when they complain like that?
They are readers. They are our bosses. What we have to do, we have to accede to their requests.
Doesn't it reflect, though, a society in which we live? Do we not, as media, need to hold this mirror up and reflect the goings-on, even if they are dramatic and violent in our society?
Yeah. No, I think where I would criticize you, Reggie, is that, well, to a certain point, you are right. One is not running a socialist organization here. One is running a commercial enterprise. And as you say, your bosses pay every day by buying your paper. But also, as you know, and I think it's part of your ethics and your morality, is that papers should confront their readers with those things they don't want to be told about. Because in that way, we play a role in creating a better society.
And hopefully we play a role in creating some kind of a change, I imagine. Teresa, your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, you know, today in court we really saw a little bit of the loss that violence causes. I mean, there was talk about what Oscar's earnings was going to become, you know, 5 to 6 times what he was earning after the London Olympics. There were the trips he was meant to go on with Reva, you know, the romantic occasions. And I think it is also important for the public to see the consequences of violence, of, you know, perhaps potentially irresponsible firearm use, of child abuse. And I think, you know, with the trial and with other stories, we're showing the readers the potential consequences for these things that are going on around us all the time.
And I think you've used a very pertinent word there, loss, because in any violent crime there is loss on both sides. And I still maintain, irrespective of whether or not he's found guilty, 2 entire families have had their lives shattered either way. Before the break,